Okay, we're gonna take a look at the practice from 13.3, page 574, 7 to 2070 odds. So we're just solving equations using addition and subtraction, and this time it's gonna involve negatives and fractions and decimals. So our goal is to isolate the variable by performing inverse operations. So we find the variable. Right now it's k plus 6. So to get k alone, the opposite of adding 6 is subtracting 6. And we show that on both sides. Inverses will cancel. 6 minus 6 would be 0. K is alone, which is exactly what we want. Now, you need to be very careful with this because you probably are just used to doing 14 minus 6, coming up with 8, and then you have your answer. But that's not what it says. I would write it horizontally, okay? It says start with a negative 14 and then subtract 6, okay? Well, remember, we don't actually subtract. Instead, we are gonna add the opposite. We'll now look at it. I owe 14 and I owe 6, which means I owe a total of 20. So k equals negative 20. Number 9. Number 9 is c minus 7.6 equals negative 4. Dotted line down the equal sign. Here's our variable. Right now, we're subtracting 7.6. We want to get c alone, so we do the inverse of that, which is adding, and we're going to show it on both sides. Okay? Inverses cancel. C is isolated, exactly what we want. This is what we have to solve, and we need to be careful. So let's write it over here in the order it's presented. Negative 4 plus 7.6. So I have 7.6, or you can think of it as money. I have $7.60. I owe 4. So we would need to subtract these to figure out what it is I still have. So 7.6 minus 4, I bet you could do that mentally. Otherwise, line up those decimal points and we get 3.6. I have more than I owe, which makes it a positive. Okay, number 11. 1/2 equals Q plus 2/3. So our first job is to draw that dotted line, find our variable, which is Q, and it says we're adding 2/3 to Q. So we are going to subtract 2/3 from both sides to isolate our variable. Inverses cancel, because in this case they add to 0, and I'm left with just Q. Then this is what we have to figure out. So I would be very cautious here. I would start by writing it horizontally. Oops, not a negative. It started as 1/2, and we're subtracting 2/3. Let's get a common denominator first. So the least common denominator would be 6. So 1/2 would change to 3/6. And these would be multiplied by 2 to get 4/6. Now, again, instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. Denominator stays the same when we add fractions, so we really only need to consider the numerators. I owe 4, I have 3, I still owe 1. So Q is equal to negative 1/6. 13. 13 is G minus 9 equals negative 19. Okay, get your dotted line going down the equal sign. The opposite of subtracting 9 is adding 9. We show that on both sides. Inverses cancel. In this case, they add to 0. I'm left with just G. And then here's where I need to pay careful attention. I would do it off to the side. Negative 19 plus 9. Remember, think of it as I owe 19. I only have 9, which means I still owe you 10. So G equals negative 10. Okay, 15. Number 15. For and 58 hundredths equals, no, not equals, plus, let's make that a plus sign, plus y equals 2.5. Okay, dotted line goes here. So we want to get y all by itself. So we need to start by subtracting 4.58 from both sides. Okay, inverses cancel and I'm left with just y. And then again, be very careful over here on the right-hand side. I would write it vertically. So 2.5 was what came first, and I'm subtracting 4 and 58 hundredths. Okay, so we're actually going to add the opposite, and maybe you want to think of this in terms of money. I owe $4.58. I only have $2.50. You can put a 0 here for a placeholder if you want. So we need to subtract these two decimals to figure out what I still owe. Decimal points line up. 8 minus 0 is 8, 5 minus 5 is 0, and 4 minus 2 is 2. Okay, so be careful though. It says we owe 4.58, we only have 2.5. So we owe more than we have, which makes it negative 2 and 8 hundredths. Okay, on to 17. Number 17. Q plus 5/9 equals 1/6. So our job is to isolate our variable. Right now, 5/9 is being added to Q, so we need to subtract it to get Q by itself. Inverses cancel. Q is alone, which is exactly what we want. And then my biggest suggestion is to take this side of the equation, write it horizontally. Okay, 1/6 came first, and then it said to subtract those 5/9. Start by getting a common denominator first. I'm going to use 36 by multiplying these by 6. So 6 over 36. Drop down my subtraction. These would be multiplied by 4 to get 20, 36. Okay, so instead of subtracting, we're gonna add the opposite. And when we add fractions, the denominator doesn't change. I owe 20, I have 6, which means I still owe 14 over 36, okay? These can both be divided by 2 to reduce to -7 over 18. So all of that work to show Q is equal to -7/18. Number 19. W plus 3 3/8 equals 1 5/6. Dotted line down your equal sign. Let's isolate W by subtracting 3 3/8. Inverses cancel. We're left with just W. And then I would start by writing this part of the equation horizontally, 1 5/6 minus 3 3/8. Okay, so I can already tell that I'm subtracting a bigger number. So I'm going to add the opposite instead. So I owe 3 3/8. I have 1 5/6. I need to subtract those to figure out what I still owe. So 3 3/8 minus 1 5/6. I need a common denominator first. I'm going to use 24ths. So 8 times 3 makes 24. 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 24ths is my equivalent. 6 times 4 is 24. So multiply 5 by 4 and we get 20. Ooh, we can't take away 20 from 9. So we have to borrow. 3 becomes a 2. Here's the one whole that I borrowed, 24 over 24, which means I now have a total. I started with 9, I borrowed 24, I now have a total of 33 over 24. Now I can subtract. 33 minus 20 is 13 over 24. 2 minus 1 is 1. I owed more than what I had, which makes it a negative. So W is equal to -1 and 13/24. That one was a lot of work, wasn't it? Okay, a couple left. 21. Okay, so 21 says describe and correct the error in finding the solution. And it had x plus 8 equals 10. And then the book shows that what they did is they added 8 to each side. But that wouldn't get x alone. That would leave us with x equals 16. So we have to do the inverse, which is actually subtracting 8 from both sides. The 8s now will add up to 0, and x equals 2. Okay? Number 23. 23, we have two jobs. We're writing it an equation, and then we're solving. 10 more than a number C, so here's the number C, here's 10 more than that, that's our equal sign, 3. There's our equation, now we have to solve it. So the inverse, so here's our variable, we have to get it alone. The opposite of adding 10 is subtracting 10, we have to show that on both sides. The 10s will add up to 0, inverses always cancel. Here's what we have to solve, 3 minus 10. So instead of subtracting 10, we're gonna think of it as adding the opposite. I owe 10, I have 3, I still owe 7. 25, same job. The difference between a number P and 6, difference indicates subtraction, and the difference is -14. So to isolate our variable to get P alone, we need to add 6 to both sides. The 6's are inverses, they will add to 0, P is alone, and then here's what we need to work out, -14 plus 6. I owe 14, I have 6, which means I still owe 8. So P equals -8. Okay, 27. Last one, a word problem. Of course, I need a new page for the last one. Seems like that's always the case. Okay, let's read it together. A company makes a profit of $1.38 million. This is $2.54 million more than last year. What was the profit last year? So it says that the current profit, this is in millions, but I'm just gonna write it as a decimal for now. It says this amount is, there's our equal sign, 2.54 mil more than whatever last year was. Okay, so we don't know what last year was, so we have to write that as a variable. So dotted line will go here. Here's our variable, here's our addition symbol, so we have to subtract 2.54 from both sides to figure out what last year's profit was. This isolates our variable. And then here, be careful, okay? Don't get tricked over here. So let's write it off to the side, 1.38 minus 2.54. So we're gonna add the opposite. I owe 2.54, I have 1.38, so we're going to subtract these to figure out what we still owe. Okay, so when I subtract both of those, here's what we got, but I owed more. So this is a negative. So y equals negative 1.16. So let's try to make sense of that in terms of the problem. The profit last year was negative $1.16 million. Well, you can have a negative profit. It can be expressed as a negative. That just means they lost 1.16 million. Okay, so that completes the classwork.